Dr. Morey, Uncivilized Vitality, this is our anatomy playlist. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you do that. Like the channel, like the video, leave comments below or whatever. So if you are just interested in how anatomy functions, that's what this playlist is for. If you're an anatomy student using this as a reference, like for instance trying to pass my class, then this is something you're probably going to want to watch, and just pause or rewind as necessary. So this video is overview of the muscular system. So the human body is divided into muscle, that's the soft squishy stuff that we eat, the steaks and chops, not of other humans hopefully, but yeah, you know what I mean. So in conjunction with bones and the skeletal articulation systems or categories is how we move around. In truth, we're really just one big muscle, and we're divided into discrete compartments by fascial layers. I'll go into that in a different video. I'm just going to give you a muscle overview today so you get the basics of it. So we have about 632-ish muscles, and they're attached to our skeletal framework mainly through tendons. There are some other muscle to cartilage and muscle to fascia or subcutaneous structures, direct attachments, but mainly muscle is attached to bone via tendon. Muscles are made up of muscle fibers, which are muscle cells. They're very elongated cells, and then those are wrapped around with connective tissue layer, and then those individual muscle cells that are wrapped by connective tissue are in turn wrapped into discrete bundles called fascicles, and those bundles are wrapped with other bundles and fascicles in a third layer of connective tissue, which forms a muscle in particular. And then as those layers of connective tissue are drawn out at the ends or the heads of the muscle, they form tendon without any elastic components. So that's a basic structure of muscle. I'll do another video where I go into detail on that and draw it out, but we're going to talk about just the overview. So a couple things to remember about muscles. There's two ways to categorize them. From a nervous system standpoint, they're going to be voluntary or involuntary. Your involuntary muscles are your smooth muscles, the cardiac muscle to a large degree, and they're controlled by the autonomic nervous system, the division of the nervous system that's sometimes called your unconscious, the ANS. ANS is going to use involuntary muscles as one of its effector categories: cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands. And then the voluntary muscles are going to be controlled through your somatic nervous system or your conscious nervous system, and this is basically skeletal muscle. The three categories of muscle, like I just mentioned, they're either voluntary or involuntary. The only voluntary effector you have is striated muscle, also known as skeletal muscle. These are the muscles that everybody's familiar with when we use the term muscle. Muscular, the actual word muscle, comes from a Latin term that means muscule, a little mouse. So we'll get to that some other time. So little mouse, probably because the way they moved under the surface of the skin reminded the early anatomists of maybe mice running through the field. So little mice. You have three different types histologically or tissue, from a tissue perspective, three types of muscle. Smooth muscle. These cells are smooth, and upon microscopic investigation, they have no striations or striped appearance. They're smooth and they're spindle shaped. I still say spindle shape. I'm older, so I know what a spindle is, but most people don't. I always tell in class, I remind students that spindles like when you had a Play-Doh and you're rolling it into like a little Play-Doh snake or clay, and it gets sort of sharp and pointy on both ends and it's sort of fat in the middle. Or the spindle on a spinning wheel, like from Disney's story. Well, not Disney, they stole it from the Grimm fairy tales, but whatever. Sleeping Beauty, she pricks her finger on the spindle of the spinning wheel. That was just that sharp stick, the spindle that you wound the thread around as you spun thread, and it got fat in the middle, pointy on both ends. Spindle. Smooth muscle cells are spindle shaped. All right, they're kind of spindle shaped, fat in the middle, small on either end. Single nucleus, and they're woven in on each other in no real particular organization. So these make a smooth appearance without the striation, the single nucleus. Smooth muscle is organs, glands, anything internal, and they are involuntary. Striated or skeletal muscle, they're more columnar shaped, so they kind of go from one end to the other, and they've got these alternating bands of protein inside. They're multinucleated, and they're organized like the walls of like the side of a log cabin, and they form the structures we know as skeletal muscles that attach to our bones and move us around, and they are voluntary. Then you have a third type of muscle tissue called cardiac, which is only found in one place, as you've guessed from the name. That is your heart muscle. It has properties of smooth and striated muscle. It's mainly involuntary. A lot of people say completely involuntary, but there is some through biofeedback and some other things you can kind of influence your heart rate a little bit. So there must be something to it. But it's got the striations like skeletal muscle, but it's branched. The cells are branched and interwoven, real dense like smooth muscle. It's mainly involuntary like smooth muscle. It has a big fat California raisin size nuclei. And the neat thing about cardiac muscle, you look through a microscope. This is something maybe we can do in lab. If you're a student. If you're not, then no lab for you. They have where the two ends of muscle fibers, adjacent muscle fibers, will kind of weld next to each other, and it's called an intercalated disc. So those are the tissue types of muscle. I hate to say the types because there's different ways to organize muscle. Voluntary, involuntary would be the way I talk about muscle if I were teaching neuro. I talk about neuro class. In a histology or a gross anatomy form, we want to know smooth, striated cardiac. And then we're going to talk about the properties of muscle. There's just 5 simple properties. And again, I use these terms. Muscle has contractility when it is stimulated properly through electrochemical means, typically through a neuromuscular junction in the nervous system. Muscles can shorten their length and contract. Muscles have extensibility. They have the ability to be stretched to a certain, within limits. They have elasticity, meaning once that stretch has gone away from the extensibility, they will return basically to roughly their original size or resting length, which brings us to the property of tonus, which is that partially contracted state that all muscles, or most skeletal muscles and even smooth muscle has, that allows it to be ready to move or contract at a moment's notice with stimulation. Tonus is what keeps us upright. A lot of times if you don't have any anatomy training, you think about the skeleton as a framework, the muscles hang off of it, but it's actually, the muscles are under, is the tension unit, and the bones are the struts or compression units. And the muscles contracting against those bones is what allows us to leverage our way into an upright position. No one ever faints and loses all muscle tone and just kind of slumps on their skeleton. You ever seen someone, if you've knocked someone out or choked someone unconscious or seen someone faint, they don't fall over like a tree. They go straight down like a puddle. It's like cutting the strings on a puppet, because you immediately lose all tonus, muscles cease contracting from that tonal state, and you just drop down. The last property of muscle, just to be familiar with as a basic overview, is irritability, meaning they can respond to stimulus. Not just neuromuscular stimuli from the central nervous system, as in voluntary, even involuntary control, but chemical irritations, acid base, pH disruptions, hypoxia. There's lots of different stimuli that muscle will respond to. Now, to organize the 632-ish muscles, we're going to have a naming scheme, or different ways that muscles are identified. One of the ways you're going to identify them is their fiber orientation. Skeletal muscle, which we're talking about here. We're going to skip smooth and cardiac. Skeletal muscle, we're going to talk about their fiber orientation because it's visible to the naked eye, and the fiber is going to be going in certain directions. In another video, when I go into how muscles actually contract, we're going to talk about what's known as the sliding filament theory. It has to do with different conformational changes at a cellular level, and some pretty neat actions, but we'll get into that later. But you can see these fibers and the way they go. For instance, my biceps brachii, the fibers are oriented lengthwise, longitudinally in the muscle. They don't run side to side. They're organized so when they shorten, the two attachments of the muscle to my forearm and from my shoulder, it shortens and then through simple mechanics moves my skeleton, my framework in that direction. So fiber direction, we can talk about a rectus muscle, a bipennate, a multipennate fiber arrangement. The function of the muscle. So the flexor digitorum, I have flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus. One's deep, one's superficial, and they flex my digits. So we can identify them according to their function. We can identify them according to their shape. My trapezius muscle or my rhomboid major, my teres muscles, which means trapezoidal, rhomboidal, and cylindrical, respectively. We can name them by their location. My biceps brachii. The biceps brachii would be different than my biceps femoris. Femoris refers to the femoral or thigh. Brachii refers to the brachium or the arm. So we can identify by location. Number of heads. Let's just keep picking on biceps brachii. I have a two-headed muscle. I also have a triceps brachii, a three-headed muscle. Heads being the tendinous, the termination of the contractile element of the muscle into a tendon that's attached to bone. And then, which I should make a mention of that right now. I don't use in my anatomy instruction or exploration with students, help them learn anatomy. I don't hold much to the convention of origin and insertion. Sometimes the books say origin's the immovable part or non-moving part, and then the insertion is the movable part, or proximal distal. There's lots of different ideas, but it just doesn't hold up, because if the origin of my biceps brachii are my coracoid process for the short head, and then the supraglenoid tubercle of my scapula for the long head then inserts on my radius. How come this is the insertion? Because my radius moves. What if I hold a branch and my radius is not moving and I pull my shoulder up? So now the origins and insertion switch. It seems too confusing. So I just name muscles and will expect my students to know them by their attachments. Wherever they insert or attach, just know it that way. Where the head's attached to bone, that's what I want to know. Sometimes the size of the muscle factors in how we identify that. I have a gluteus maximus. I also have a gluteus minimus and a gluteus medius. So size can be a factor. And then you can actually name the attachment to name the muscle. We have this muscle that runs on the side of your neck. It's called the sternocleidomastoid. That's an easy way to identify that. It comes from my sternum, sternocleido, my clavicle, and then it inserts on the mastoid process, my occipital bone in my skull, sternocleidomastoid, SCM. So these are different ways we can identify muscles. These 7 are the basics. These are the 5 properties of muscle, the 3 tissue structures of muscle, the 2 ways that muscles are divided up neurologically. And what else would you need to know? So for an anatomy course for Dr. Morey, if you were taking it, I would expect you to know, be able to identify a muscle, know its actions, know its innervation, in particular root level and specific nerve that brings innervation, and its vascular supply. So you should be able to identify the muscle with any of these that apply. Its function, its shape, its location, its attachments, its function, its fiber direction. You should know its vasculature, its innervation, and any and all bony attachments. So 632 muscles, a minimum of 7 descriptors per muscle. That's a lot. So get to work on that, and I'll do a few more videos. I'm sure I've done them by now. Actually, you can look on the list and then get to that. This is just a muscle overview. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel and maybe turn on the notifications so when the new anatomy videos go up, you can keep track, although I think I'm almost done with the body. That's it.